So there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and we call them Aleph, Bet. In fact, the English word alphabet comes from this, Aleph, Bet. In Greek, it is Alpha, Beta. In Hebrew, it is Aleph, Bet. Obviously, Greek comes later on, and therefore it's come from Hebrew, Aleph, Bet. The letters are also called as Otiot, and the word occurs 3 times in the Bible, and I will talk about this in another video in detail. But for now, we can say they are letters Otiot, Aleph, Bet. So let's look at the 22 letters now. The first letter is, obviously, as I said, Aleph. You pronounce it Aleph. This is how it looks. And the next letter is Bet. Bet. Gimel or Gimel. Dalet. He. Vav. Zayin. Chet. Tet. Yod or Yud. Kaf. Lamed. Mem. Nun. Samek. Ain. Pe. Tzadi or Tzadik. Kof. Resh. Shin. Tau. So these are the 22 letters of Hebrew alphabet. Interestingly, if you're familiar with the Bible, in Psalm 119, you can find the Hebrew alphabet in your English Bible. There are 22 sections in the Psalm. It is the longest chapter in the entire Bible. It has 176 verses, divided into 22 sections with 8 verses in each section. And every section is headed by a Hebrew letter, because there are 22 sections. You can see there in the picture Aleph, Bet, Gimel. Now, the reason is because the first letters of the sentences in the Aleph section begin with Aleph. The verses in Bet section begin with Bet, etc. That's the reason why it has been divided like that. And so 22 letters in Hebrew. Now, the Lord Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation says, I am Alpha and Omega. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. I take the Hebrew Salkinson Ginsberg translation of the New Testament into Hebrew, where he says, Anochi Aleph ve Tau, Rishon ve Acharon, Rosh ve Sof. Anochi Aleph ve Tau. Aleph ve Tau, meaning I am Aleph and Tau. He is referring to the first and the last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. If you look at it in English, I am Alpha and Omega. Omega is the last letter in the Greek, but the equivalent in the Hebrew is Tau. That is why you can see in the Hebrew translation we read Aleph and Tau. So this is the Aleph, the highlighted ones, and you have the Tau. Now, these are the equivalent English letters and the pronunciations. I will do a separate video on the pronunciations. For example, if you look at Dalet, it can be pronounced as Da or Da. Also, if you look at Kaf, Kaf can be pronounced as Ka or Kha. So it has alternate pronunciations. Shin, for example, can also be pronounced as Sin. Israel, for example, that word uses the letter sin, shin, sin. There is a dot on the top that is kept at a different location. So we will talk about them in separate videos. But at the moment, all these differences in pronunciation. Let's go back to the alphabet, and I want to introduce what we call them as the Sofit letters, the last letters. For example, the letter Kaf has a end form, as in if that letter is found at the end of a word, it is not written the way it is normally done, but it is written slightly differently, as it is shown here in Kaf Sofit. So for Kaf, you have an end form, and then for Mem also you have an end form, Mem Sofit. You also have Nun Sofit, and you have Pe Sofit, and you have Tzadi Sofit. So there are 5 Sofit letters, and that makes up in total 27 letters, but primarily remember there are only 22 letters. The Sofits are basically a variation in writing. They're still called Kaf, Mem, Nun, Pe, and Tzadi. Okay, so that's the 27 because of the Sofit letters. Now, these letters that you see are written in a different font. The font being it's a different font. As you can see, there are some crowns on it. If you look at Gimel, there are 3 prongs like crowns. Also Tet, Zayin, etc. So they have crowns. So this is a calligraphic font. Just in case if you come across any of these, so you can recognize. Now let's take the letters Aleph to Tau, right? And look at the numbers. What are the numbers? They also represent the numbers. The alphabet in Hebrew not only represents sounds, but also represents numbers, meaning they don't have 1, 2, 3, 4 these numerals in Hebrew. There are no numerals. So you have to use Hebrew letters to represent a number, or write it in words. If you want to write it in figures, then you have to use the letters. Either way, you have to use the Hebrew alphabet to describe a number. And so these are the numbers 1 to 9. So the first row is 1 to 9. The second row begins with Yud, 10 to 90. Okay, and then of course the next is the 100 to 900 you would expect, but only 4 are there, and therefore 100 to 400. But wait, remember the Sofit letters, and that completes, and so we do have indeed 100 to 900. So those are the values: 1 to 9, 10 to 90, 100 to 900. And then these last letters can also have their original values. In fact, that is the default way of calculating, but an alternative way of calculating is to use this 500, 600, 700, 800, 900 values. Now after 900 comes what? Obviously 1000. And what is 1000? Again, Aleph is 1000. Interestingly, because though not always written like that, but Aleph is 1000 because the word for Aleph, slightly pronounced differently, Aleph, means 1000. Now there is no difference in the letters. Aleph is written with 3 letters: Aleph, Lamed, Pe. But only the pronunciation marks is what makes it different, and most of the times there are no pronunciation marks. And so whether it is Aleph or Aleph, it also means 1000. It's very interesting. So it goes back to the beginning, as you can see after that. Right, now we would have known about or heard of the words jot and tittle, for it appears in the Bible. The Lord Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 5 verse 18, he says, "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, that is the Torah, till all be fulfilled. Not a jot or a tittle shall pass till all be fulfilled. And the words that are used in Hebrew, Sarkinson Ginsburg translation, as I have mentioned earlier, is jot is yud, and a tittle is quotes. Yud and quotes. But what are these jots and tittles? Here is the yud or yod. We say yod and yud are just one and the same. I have shown in two different fonts. On the left hand side you can see two boxes. They are both yud. And the first one is the regular font and the second one is the calligraphic font. It's so tiny, it's just like a dot. That's what the point is. It's a yud. Even that wouldn't pass away. But what is the tittle? Now look at these two letters, bet and kaf. What is the difference between them? The difference is that if I overlay kaf over bet, you can see that small extra prolongation on the right hand side in the bottom and shown in the green. That's the tittle. That's the tittle. And therefore it's like a serif in English. You know, we talk about the sans serif fonts. So that extra a little bit prolongation, elongation, you can say, that is the tittle. Not a jot or a tittle shall no wise pass from the law. Right, now that we've seen the bet and kaf looking a little bit the same, I must mention a few cases like that where the letters look the same. So there is good likelihood that beginners will confuse them. Bet and kaf will look the same to some people. So be careful. So they are different. Bet is different from kaf. So don't confuse them. You can see the difference. Similarly, dalet and resh, people can confuse. But again, there is a difference. Now, dalet also can be confused with kaf sofit. Kaf sofit. The last letter of the kaf. The last letter of the kaf sofit is the end form of kaf, as we have mentioned earlier. Right, so the next letter that could be confused is he. He with chet. He with chet. It's very similar. There is a gap on he where there is no gap in chet. Vav can be confused with nun sofit. What's the difference? They both look the same. You can see even in the previous thing, the kaf sofit is actually below the writing line, the line on which you write the letters. That goes a bit below kaf sofit. Also nun sofit goes below. So that's the last letter of the word. When nun occurs in a word, in the end, that's how you write it, nun sofit. And so they look the same, but it's a bit more elongated. Now, vav can also be confused with zayin in some cases, although in this font there is clearly a T sort of a marker on the top. But that size of it may be sometimes small in some fonts, in some printed Bibles, and therefore it's very likely that some people might get confused with zayin and vav. Tet and mem are quite different, to be honest, but again, beginners might confuse between them. Okay, kaf and nun are very similar looking again, but nun is narrower than kaf, as you can see. That's the difference. Okay, and the next letter that one could confuse is samek. Samek is either this triangle is a pointy shape in the bottom, or in some fonts it is circular, almost circular. And mem sofit it looks like a square. That's the difference. These two sometimes can throw off. I mean, if you find an old manuscript, even experts will have a challenge, except obviously they know the words and therefore they could tell which is it, or whether it is occurring in the end, etc. So mem sofit occurs only in the end, and if the word makes sense, obviously you know it. But sometimes you could confuse between samek Samek and Mem Sofit. Ain and Sadi, they are actually different. You can see them to be different, but beginners will confuse between them. Het and Tau also is a source of confusion, and so is Tzadi with Tzadi Sofit. Tzadi Sofit is straight below, whereas Tzadi, he gets back to the left. So that's about the Hebrew letters. For now, thank you for watching this video, and letters in the Hebrew language. So they have these names: Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zain, Het, etc. until Tau. And there are 5 final forms, meaning if Kaf, Mem, Nun, Pe and Tzade, those letters, if they occur at the end of the word, then these forms are used rather than the regular forms. Okay, that's the meaning of it. Now, how do they sound? So these are the names of the letters, but how do they sound? Aleph is silent unless there is a vowel. Okay. Bet is pronounced as in boy, b sound, or v sound, depending upon, I will explain what is it dependent upon. Either b sound or v sound. That's bet. Gimel is g sound, girl here. Dalet is dad. Hat, hey. Vav is van, v. Again, a similar sound like bet. And Zain is zoo or zoom, the tool that we use. Het, this is a difficult letter to pronounce for English speaking people, I suppose. Het, in Scotland there are lakes called Loch Lomond. They have Loch. So Bach, Loch. So that sound is Het. And Tet as in top, T sound. And Yod is Y, Y sound, U, for example. And Kaf could be Ki as in key, K sound, or again H sound, Loch sound. So here Kaf sounds like Het, like as in the CH in Loch, but in some occasions it also sounds like K, key. So remember, there are 2 sounds for some letters, which I will be explaining a bit later. Just remember, some letters, not all letters, have these 2 different sounds. Lamed is L sound, let. Man, M sound for mem. Nun is N sound, net. Samek is S sound, set. Ain is silent. Fe, Pe, the letter Pe has a pronunciation like F, fan, or pan, P sound. Again, it depends. Now, so this is the 3rd letter that has 2 different sounds so far. Tzade is like pots, ts sound, ts sound. Pots, cats, rats, the ts sound is tzade. Okay. Kaf is sounds like K, but a little bit like Q, quick, K. It is not Q, but it's only Q sound. There's no U sound in it, it's only Q sound. Quick, a K sound, similar to K. Resh is R sound, R, red. Now Shin is like sharp, sh sound, sharp, or it could be sounded like S sound, set, similar to Samek, Okay, again we have Shin with 2 different sounds here, and we have Tau as in top, similar to Tet. And then we have Kaf, Mem, Nun, Pe, Tzade. They pretty much sound like the other letters, but I will explain which of the two, because some of them, for example, kaf there are two sounds, pe, it sounds as fan, there are two sounds. Which one should we select is what I will explain in the end. So just remember, about we have 1, 2, 3, 4 letters at least that have two sounds. Okay, so remember the alphabet, recognize the alphabet, remember the names of the alphabet and the sounds of the alphabet. That's the exercise. If you master these, then you can learn to read Hebrew. Of course, you also need to learn the vowels, but it's a good start. You can start with this. Right, now these two letters are silent, as I said, Aleph and Ayin. Unless there is a vowel, they are silent. Now this rule is according to the modern Israeli pronunciation, which most of us are following now, including the Bible grammar books. However, it may be possible that in the past they were pronounced differently. Aleph was supposedly a glottal stop.
High and tight, honey, high and tight.
For example, in Britain, in the south of England, especially in London, there is a Cockney accent where they say ba'a, be'a. So better is be'a and butter is ba'a. So that there's a glottal stop in between, and that glottal stop is how they pronounce. I mean, they use Aleph for a glottal stop apparently. Ain also is used in the same way, except with a nasal sound. Again, those are old sounds. For now, we can simply treat them as silent, and if there is a vowel, we can just pronounce the vowel sound. Okay, so those two are silent. Now comes the Shin. Let's get to the other ones a bit later. Then comes the Shin. This letter Shin, if there is a dot on the left, it is pronounced shin, like as in sharp, Shin. But if the dot is on the left, let's go back. If the dot is on the right, then we pronounce it Shin, as in sharp, sh sound. But if the dot is on the left, then you pronounce it like samek, set, sin. So this is the siboleth, whereas the previous one is shiboleth. So dot on the right is shiboleth. So the correct pronunciation, this is a good technique to remember. Shiboleth was supposed to be correct, whereas the Benjamites pronounced it wrongly. We read about it in the Bible. They pronounced it siboleth instead of shiboleth. Since shiboleth is correct, it is right. So when the dot is on the right, you pronounce it as shiboleth. But if the dot is on the left, then you pronounce it siboleth. Sa, sound similar to samek. That's about Shin and Sin. Next comes what are known as Begad Kefat letters. What are these Begad Kefat letters? It's basically Bet Gimel Dalet Kaf Pe Tav or Begad Kefat. Okay, Begad Kefat are basically it's like an acronym of these 6 letters. These Begad Kefat letters, they receive a dot known as Dagesh Lene or weak Dagesh, or Dagesh Lene. They receive a dot, and when there is a dot, they are supposed to be pronounced differently. So they are pronounced here in this case, these Begad Kefat letters. You see this bet is pronounced as vet, v sound, okay, and the remaining are the same. Now, but once we put in the dot, let's look at what happens when you put in the dot. The bet is pronounced as b, boy sound, b sound. Whereas without the dot, it is pronounced v sound. Now, Gimel Dalet, although, well, we'll talk about them. There is no difference for now. The standard pronunciation, standard Hebrew grammar textbook pronunciation, Israeli pronunciation, there is no difference. There might have been a difference in the past in the biblical times, but again, it depends on the culture, depends on the geography. We can't really determine which one is which. For now, only bet, kaf, and pay have a different pronunciations. When there is a dot, bet becomes boy, ba sound. Kaf becomes softer key, whereas in the previous loch, het sound, kha sound in kaf. But once dot is there, it becomes softer. It's pronounced as ka. In the letter pe, if there is no dot, it is pronounced fa. But when there is a dot, it is pronounced as pa. Pa with a dot and fa without a dot. Okay, so these are Begal Kefat letters. So there are 6 letters. Supposedly they were pronounced differently with a dot, but for all practical purposes, only 3 letters are pronounced differently with a dot: Bet, Kaf, and Pe. These 3 letters. What about the other 3? Possibly this letter tau, ta, top. It could have been pronounced as tha, as in tha sound instead of ta sound. 3, for example. Through, the tha sound. Whereas in case of dalet, instead of da, dad sound, it could be the or their sound, for example, or that, or this, the sound. Instead of da sound, it could have been the sound. But this is all a guesswork. So let's forget about all this. So there are only 3. Again, I'll repeat. There are 3 boxes here highlighted. Bet, kaf, and pe have different pronunciations when there is a dot, and they are softer. If there is no dot, this is vet. If there's a dot, it's bet. If there is no dot here, it is pronounced kha, and when there is a dot, you pronounce ka. Here, when there is no dot, you pronounce fa. When there is a dot, you pronounce pa. That's the Begad Kafat letters. Now, what about the last 5 Sofit letters? The Sofit letters are the letters used at the last letter of a word when this kaf, mem, nun, pe, and sade. If these letters occur at the end of the word, these forms are used rather than the standard forms. But how are they pronounced? These are always pronounced as though there is no dagesh. So for example, kaf is pronounced as loch, kha sound. This final kaf is pronounced kha, as though there is no dagesh. And again, pe, the final pe is pronounced with the fa sound. The remaining ones have no impact, no change, because they do not belong to the Begad Kefat letters. So they are pronounced as mem, nun, and tzadeh as usual. Only these 2 letters, kaf and pe, they're pronounced as though there is no dot. Okay?